Have you ever cried for someone who seems to drift further away, even though they're living under your roof? Ever felt your heart silently break while you keep smiling on the outside, pretending everything's fine? This story is for those who believe a mother's love is stronger than pain. For those who've dropped to their knees on the cold floor of a dark room, whispering prayers that seem to vanish into thin air. But it's also for those who still carry hope, even when everything around screams it's not worth it anymore. Rachel was the kind of mom who loved quietly, endured silently, and prayed in secret. Young, devoted, married to a good man who was often absent due to long work hours, she saw her son Josh as the purest reflection of everything good and beautiful in the world. For years he was the joyful one, the kid who made everyone laugh, who hugged tight and said, "I love you," without shame. But at 15, Josh started to change. First came the silence, then the empty stares, and finally the cold replies and the yelling. Rachel tried to understand what was going on. She blamed herself. Was she failing as a mom? Was she asking too much? Loving too little? Nothing made sense. Josh was slipping away, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't reach him. The house was now filled with slammed doors, loud music from his room, and quiet dinners. Their conversations turned into one-sided hopes, with no answers in return. One rainy afternoon, Rachel found messages on Josh's phone, texts from a dangerous group, talking about weird parties, risky dares, and even plans to run away. Her heart sank, her hands shook, but she didn't yell. She didn't confront in anger. She just prayed and cried. That night, like many before, she waited for Josh to fall asleep, then quietly stepped into his room. Kneeling by his bed, she whispered what sounded more like a desperate cry for help than a prayer. "God, I know he's still my boy. And if he's mine, he's yours. Don't let him get lost." Maybe you know someone like that. Or maybe this story is hitting home because it feels a little too familiar. If that's the case, share it in the comments. Sometimes opening your heart is the first step toward healing. Rachel knew she couldn't control Josh's choices, but she refused to stop planting seeds. She started leaving notes in his room, little pieces of paper with messages like, "You are loved. God has a plan for you. Nothing can separate you from my love." Josh never replied, but he never threw them away either. Time went on, and the emotional distance only grew. Josh's dad suggested therapy, but Josh refused. Said no one understood how he felt. Said he didn't want help. Rachel, heartbroken, went back to what she knew best. Praying. Quietly. Through tears. Sometimes just staring into the night sky. "Lord, I don't know what else to do. But I know you do." One late night, rummaging through an old memory box, Rachel found a photo. Josh as a baby, smiling in her arms, both lit by a sunbeam through the window. She held it like it was the last thing connecting her to her son. And once more she prayed. But this time with a renewed flicker of faith. "I believe, God. Even now I believe." If this story is speaking to you, don't keep it to yourself. Maybe someone out there needs to hear it. Share it. Comment. Testimonies aren't just for the victorious. They're for the ones still in the middle of the fight. It was a regular Friday. Rachel had made Josh's favorite dinner, but he never showed up. The hours dragged, the phone stayed silent, and every minute felt like a weight on her chest. When it finally rang, it was past midnight. A cold voice on the other end. "Your son was found with a group involved in vandalism. He's okay, but someone needs to pick him up." Rachel felt the ground disappear beneath her. Like all her prayers had evaporated. But she didn't cry. She took a deep breath, grabbed the keys, and went. Driving there, she didn't know if she was praying or just breathing. But when she saw Josh sitting in the police station, exhausted and empty-eyed, she didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She just hugged him, tightly, like holding someone about to drown, and said only this: "You're my son, and I will never give up on you." The drive home was quiet, but something had shifted inside Rachel. As she drove through the dark streets, she prayed under her breath, not asking why anymore, just thanking. 'Cause he was alive. 'Cause there was still time. Because God could still turn this around. When they got home, Josh went straight to his room. Rachel, instead of going to bed, sat beside him, held his hand like she used to when he was little, and prayed. In silence. Just her and God. Just her and hope. That night, she wrote in her journal something you might need to hold on to too. It's still dark, but I believe the sun will rise. In the days that followed, small changes began to show. Josh wasn't yelling as much. His responses had less anger. Rachel noticed he never threw the notes away. One day, she found them all saved inside a book on his shelf. Her heart warmed. It was like each seed of faith planted in dry soil was finally showing signs of life. Maybe you're going through something like this. Maybe you're tired of hoping, tired of fighting, tired of holding on. But hear me, God's timing is never off. If this story. Later that day, Rachel and Josh walked together to church. It was a special gathering, where young people shared how God had reached them. Josh, heart racing, stepped onto the stage. With a steady voice he said, "I was lost. And if I'm here today, it's because someone believed when I didn't. 'Cause my mom never gave up. And because God turned her every tear into a miracle. I'm living proof." Silence. The whole church listened, eyes full of tears. Every word pierced hearts that were praying for their own sons, daughters, or loved ones. Rachel felt a deep peace. This wasn't just her victory. It belonged to everyone who keeps believing when nothing makes sense. She closed her eyes and remembered every moment she wanted to quit, every whispered prayer. And she understood, this wasn't about being strong all the time. It was about holding on. And when love leads, there's always victory. If this story touched your heart, maybe it's because God is writing something quietly in your life too. Subscribe to the Living Hope channel and stay with us. Every story here is more than a video. It's a reminder. God still turns tears into miracles. And the best part, He's not done with you yet. There's still hope, still promises, and your miracle might be closer than you think. Months had passed since Josh stood on that stage. Home sounded different now. Laughter from the kitchen, honest conversations at the end of the day, soft worship music playing from his room as he read the Bible in the morning. Rachel never wanted a perfect life, just peace. And now, every little thing felt like a miracle. A simple good morning from Josh was an answered prayer. A thanks, Mom, was proof that love had never been in vain. One afternoon, she sat on the same garden bench where she'd cried so many tears. Looking up at the sky, she tried to pour out all her thanks from the depths of her heart. A neighbor who had watched it all from afar sat beside her and asked, "Rachel, how did you not give up?" She took a deep breath, paused, then answered calmly, "Because God never gave up on me. And if He never let go of my hand, I won't let go of the ones He placed in mine." That answer wasn't rehearsed, it was lived. Rachel knew the pain she had carried. The nights she questioned God's silence. The moments she feared it was too late. But there, under the open sky and surrounded by blooming flowers, she knew. Not one tear had been wasted. Each one was collected by God Himself. And turned in time into a miracle. Josh, now more mature, started helping other teens with similar struggles. He shared what he had lived, how lost he felt, and what saved him. He always made sure to say, "It was my mom's love. But above that, it was God's faithfulness. He saw me when no one else did." At one of those meetings, Rachel watched from a distance, eyes full of tenderness, feeling something inside that could only be described as wholeness. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything finally made sense. Pain had given way to purpose. Waiting had led to transformation. Love had brought life. And maybe now, as you listen to this story, you're thinking about your own. Maybe you're praying for someone. Maybe you've been crying silently for months, even years. And it all feels pointless. But hold on to this truth. God doesn't abandon the process. He works in the unseen. And at the right time, He turns pain into testimony, tears into triumph, waiting into new beginnings. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe to the Living Hope channel. Each video here is a seed of faith. And maybe, in one of them, you'll find the confirmation you've been waiting for. Because where there is love, there is always victory. And God, oh, He's still writing endings no one could ever predict. Do you believe that? Then walk with us. Your miracle might just be the next story we tell. Touched you? Leave a word of hope in the comments. Sometimes your faith can reignite someone else's. Rachel knew the journey would still be long. But she also knew God never wastes a single tear. And deep down she believed this wasn't the end of the story. One ordinary morning, over lukewarm coffee and a quiet kitchen, Rachel noticed something different. Josh came out of his room, passed through the kitchen, and instead of his usual silence or harsh reply, he stopped, looked at her with tired but softer eyes and asked, "Do you still believe God has a plan for me?" Rachel's heart nearly stopped. That simple question was like a door cracking open after months of darkness. She didn't answer right away. She walked over, placed her hand on his shoulder and said, "It's not just that I believe. I know it with all my heart." That day, mother and son sat and talked for hours. Josh opened up about the pressure he felt, fears he couldn't name, the constant feeling of not being enough. He cried, something he hadn't done in years. Rachel listened. No interruptions, no fixing. When he was done, she said, "You don't have to be perfect to be loved. I'm still here. And so is God." From that moment, things slowly began to shift. Josh, still full of doubts, agreed to visit the church youth group. He arrived with arms crossed, skeptical. But he stayed, and came back the next week. And the next. Rachel never asked how it went. She just left snacks and a note on his pillow. "I'm praying for you." Days later, Josh left a note in his mom's room. It was short, shaky handwriting, but filled with words she'd never forget. "Mom, I'm only here because of your love. You never gave up. And now I know God didn't either." Rachel held that note like it was sacred. Every line a confirmation that her prayers had reached heaven. You might be praying for someone who feels unreachable, planting love in what seems like barren ground. But hear this. God sees every seed. And in His time, even the dry places bloom. If this story reminds you of someone, share it. There's power when stories connect. Your testimony might be the spark someone else has been waiting for. Rachel knew nothing was guaranteed. But it wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about miracles. And she was living one. The weeks that followed were like watching a flower bloom after a long winter. Not sudden, not dramatic, but real. Josh began to show affection again. Shared a few more words at breakfast. Sometimes sat near his mom during a movie. Slowly, his presence became more than physical. It became emotional. Rachel didn't expect too much. She just gave thanks, even for the little things. Because she knew each gesture was an answered prayer. Josh got close to the youth leaders, started playing guitar at group meetings, even made friends who encouraged him to grow. One day he came home and said, "Mom, I think I want to get baptized." Rachel's eyes welled up, but she stayed calm, smiled and said, "That's the most beautiful step you could take." That Sunday, she watched him go down into the water, her heart overflowing. Every silent tear she'd cried had found its purpose. In a letter to the church pastor, Josh wrote that it was his mom's notes, saved for months, that kept him from giving up. He read them over and over, like lifelines pulling him out of the dark. During his testimony, he said simply, "My mom's love kept me alive. But it was God's love that brought me back." Rachel sat in the front row, tears flowing freely. She had cried out of fear before. Now she cried from gratitude. Her son was there. Life restored. Everything once lost had become part of a story only God could have written. Maybe you're waiting for a miracle. Maybe you've cried more than you've slept. Maybe you feel like your prayers are going unheard. But believe this. God never wastes a tear. He turns them into seeds. And in the right time, they bloom. If this story touched your heart, write down below. I choose to keep believing. Sometimes saying it out loud is the first step toward healing. Rachel never gave up. Even when everything seemed hopeless. Even when God's silence hurt more than words, she kept going. And God in His time answered. Because love from above never fails. That summer afternoon, with sunlight streaming through the living room window, Rachel sat at the table and opened her old prayer journal. It had been a while since she'd written. But now the words flowed like a dam breaking. God, thank you for teaching me to wait, for turning my pain into testimony, for showing me that even when I can't see it, you're working. As she turned the page, she found an old note from a night full of tears. It's still dark, but I believe the sun will rise. She smiled. The sun had truly risen. Josh got home early that day. He had something in his hands, a small box. Rachel watched curiously as he handed it to her. Inside was a simple necklace with a teardrop pendant. And a note. For you who cried for me when I couldn't cry anymore. Every tear of yours became a miracle in my life. She hugged him tight. Words weren't needed. That gift was more than a present. It was a symbol, a living reminder of God's faithfulness. That moment sealed a story of faith, perseverance, and love born from a heart that refused to give up, even without answers, even without strength.